Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasatya Deshatarine Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhattavrinda Hare Rama
Krishna I go feminine.
Hari 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 Bol.
Welcome everyone to our continuing series, Be a Gardener, glorifying and remembering the Sri Caitanya Caritamrita and the ways in which Srila Prabhupada wanted to bring it to the world so eagerly that he conceived of a marathon in which devotees worked nonstop to produce the Caitanya Caritamrita in an impossible amount of time. We're going to be hearing from some of the participants today who were key in bringing that marathon to fruition. Actual participants who are there on the ground, who have their own experiences. One of them today, who I'm very happy to introduce to you, is His Grace Rameshwar Prabhu, who was the head of the BBT, a confidant of Srila Prabhupada's, especially in book publication, and who was right there on the ground with all the proceedings that took place before, during, and after this Caitanya Caritamrita marathon. He's privy to many of the things Prabhupada said and expressed about the importance of the Caitanya Caritamrita. So historically, his presentation will be very important. And we also have Dhriti Devidasi, who's one of the artists. Many of you may know her through her paintings, but may have never met her before. She walked onto the scene there at the marathon. I'll let her talk about that herself. But it just it's very important for our movement to see those who were there. It carries on the mood just by seeing the devotees, hearing from them, their eyewitness reports, that there's a way in which we imbibe the mood of the time, the subtleties of what Srila Prabhupada thought about things. And it helps us to conceive the mission that we're carrying forward, doesn't it? So all of us, we have participants here I can see from around the world, some from Malaysia, others are tuning in from Africa, and we have all over North America and other countries. We welcome you. Thank you very much for your interest in the Vaishnav scriptures and the BBT and carrying on Srila Prabhupada's mission. And we hope today's program will edify those desires you have to be connected to the parampara through this process. So before we begin, dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, if you so desire, please empower our global team to continue expanding and spreading the glories of the Sri Caitanya Caritamrita all over the world. Om Tat Sat, Hare Krishna. So we have some slides available today. At any time, Monisha can show them. The speakers don't have to do anything special. You just have to request and we'll put it up. And we have a sort of a free-flowing program today where I'll be asking some questions, and there'll be interaction probably between Rameshwar and Dhriti Prabhus, who will be speaking spontaneously from their heart. So first of all, I'll introduce to you each of them. They can just say hello and then we can start from there. Could you just make yourself known, Rameshwar Prabhu, and then Dhriti Prabhu?
Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyevacha patitanan pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Jai Prabhupada.
Well, that's Rameshwar. Dhriti? You're on mute.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you
Hare
for
Krishna.
having me.
Okay, so that was Rameshwar and Dhriti respectively. And Rameshwar Prabhu, why don't we just start off by you giving us a little context to what's the big deal about the Caitanya Caritamrita marathon. You were there you saw it unfold and how it unfolded and why it unfolded. Why don't you tell us so that we can enter into that mood ourselves?
Thank you. Vaisheshika Prabhu, my Prabhu, Haribo. I think the first thing I wanted to say is that devotional service never depends on your qualifications, materially speaking. Has nothing to do with that. There's a famous verse that when one is fully surrendered to Krishna and their guru, it is possible for a lame man to walk, a blind man to see, a dumb man to speak, and a deaf man to hear. And the inconceivable potencies of Krishna are always behind bhakti and devotional service, and they were certainly intensely manifest during the marathon. Inconceivable potencies. And just to give you a simple example, I attended college for 1 year. Nothing practical in terms of the material job market or anything like that. I was studying religion and philosophy. And at the end of 1 year, I moved into the temple. And then when I was 20 years old, Karundar, who was the BBT trustee in LA, brought me to be his assistant. And when Karundar stepped down, I was 22. He had taught me what he did. And Prabhupada asked me, a 22-year-old who never held a job or had any training, to become in charge of publishing his books. I had no ability. It came from being like a puppet and Prabhupada moving strings, inconceivable potencies. 1 year later, the only other trustee in America, Bali Mardan, who was in Brooklyn running the press operations, he stepped down. So now I was 23. And I had never been involved in the equipment or the computer production or the layout or photography or any part of the production of the books. I did the publishing end. So when Bali Mardan stepped down, Srila Prabhupada asked me if, since he knew me and was training me as the publisher manager, could I also run the press? And I said, no, it's not possible. I tended to say that a lot to Prabhupada. But then I said, Prabhupada, it's a full-time task. It's a full-time service. And if I can't be in two places at once. And this was a conversation that Srila Prabhupada and I were having in Los Angeles in February. And he said, okay, then let's have it all in one place. And he had me fly with him to Brooklyn to present the idea to all the press devotees in February of 75. And I was the ripe age of 23. And when Prabhupada asked the press devotees, would they agree? It was his amazing beauty and humility that he even asked. He was our guru. He could just order us to do anything and we would have done it. But that was Prabhupada's style, to ask. So when you're asked something by your spiritual master, your heart just opens. Yes, of course, Guru Maharaj, of course, Srila Prabhupada, I'll do it. So then Prabhupada said to the press devotees, okay, let's wait until the Mayapur festival in March of 75, and we'll ask the GBC. And if they agree, again, Prabhupada asking the GBC something, they're going to do whatever he asks. But that was Srila Prabhupada, one of his qualities. So just before the Mayapur festival, we moved the 4 artists in the press art department to LA. And just before the Mayapur festival, we were negotiating and we were hoping to, that the GBC would say yes. So we were negotiating to sign a 5-year lease for this office building, which was sandwiched between the apartment houses that were part of New Dwarka. And so while that was going on, We were at the Mayapur Festival in late March of 75. Then Vrindavan opening Krishna Balaram Mandir in April 75. And then Prabhupada began his tour, Australia and Hawaii. And I rushed back to New Dwarka to complete the move of the ISKCON Press to LA, which happened in April of 75. And everything was being set up. We were buying new equipment. We were building offices and studios and dark rooms and arranging for housing for about 40 or 50 devotees. And somehow that was all set up by the end of May of 75. So it was during those months that I had learned that Srila Prabhupada had done the impossible. Between 73 and 74, he paused from his translating and writing of purports to the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he wrote 17 volumes of the Sri Caitanya Caritamrita in 18 months. Today, they're not 17 volumes. They're little, I think they're maybe 9 volumes. But originally, there were 17 Srimad Bhagavatam size volumes. And Prabhupada wrote 17 books in 18 months. So by the time the press had moved to New Dwarka, exactly 2 of those books had been published. Adi Leela Volume 2 came out first. Adi Leela Volume 1 had just come out, and then the press moved. So there were 15 volumes unpublished of the Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. And while Prabhupada was traveling, and by the time he got to Hawaii in June, he had also completed the translation of the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We did that in 2 volumes. So 15 unpublished Caitanya Caritamrita, 2 volumes of the 5th canto makes the 17-book marathon. That's how it was calculated.
Rameshwar Prabhu, I just want to circle back to this point about how the consolidation took place. There was, some of the devotees might not know that some of the operations of the BBT were going on in New York, and then there was the Los Angeles operation, and Prabhupada centralized it just so all this could take place. Could you comment on that and how Prabhupada thought about that?
Okay. He originally wanted everything centralized, but it worked out that book distribution, mass book distribution, really began on the West Coast, and the production was always in the East Coast. So when Prabhupada formed the BBT officially in 1972, there were 3 trustees and 1 secretary in the original BBT. Prabhupada, Karandar in the West Coast, Bali Mardan in the East Coast. They were the trustees, and I was appointed as the BBT secretary at that time in 72. So the West Coast was in charge of ordering the paper, ordering the printing, having the printers ship the books to a warehouse system that we were creating, and then from the warehouse shipping them to all the temples of the world. So marketing and publishing were in the LA BBT offices, but the production of the books, which originally began with actual equipment, press, binder, photographic equipment, gradually book distribution became so voluminous and wonderful, we couldn't keep up on our own small press. And so Prabhupada flew to Japan, negotiated an amazing deal with a printer called Dai Nippon. And what that left on the East Coast was the art department, the editing, well, the transcriptions, the editing, the typesetting, the composition, photographing the composed pages, and shipping them to the printer along with beautiful transparencies of the completed artwork. So all that production was being done on the East Coast. The publishing was being done on the West Coast. And when different trustees stepped down, Prabhupada consolidated it all in LA. He felt that it was a better environment because we had more housing. We owned a lot of buildings as part of the temple community. And as I said, I couldn't be in two places at once, and he wanted me to help organize and manage it, both. And that was how the two parts of the BBT became one.
So can you set up for us, set the scene of how the Caitanya Caritamrita marathon began? What were the circumstances in Los Angeles, and what was the seed of that? How did it all get started?
Well, after the two parts became one, as I said, by the end of April and set up in May, excuse me, we had been getting calls from Srila Prabhupada's traveling secretary in Hawaii. The secretary was calling me and telling me, you had better be ready for Prabhupada's visit in June because he's very angry with you. And I was a little stunned and said, what did I do? Why is Prabhupada angry with me? And the secretary kept saying, there are 17 books that he wrote that have not been sent to printers, have not published. He's very angry. In fact, he has me calling leaders from all around North America to fly into LA and to meet him when he arrives in June, just to have them there when he confronts you. So these were the phone calls that I was getting from our Hawaii temple between June 15th and June 20th of 75, when Srila Prabhupada arrived. And who arrived with him from different places? Kirtanananda Swami, Brahmananda Swami, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Vishnu Chan Maharaj, Satsarup Maharaj, different leaders like that, Rupanuga, Jagadish. I mean, all these great senior leaders of our movement were all there when Srila Prabhupada arrived. He gave the most famous, wondrous arrival address. If you want to hear the best arrival address, in my humble opinion, June 20, 1975, the Los Angeles arrival address, where Prabhupada describes the essence of his mission from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and then orders us, where are books? Where are books? So I am begging you, help me whenever you can. You print as many books in as many languages as possible and distribute throughout the whole world. And that is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. That is the Hare Krishna mission. And so this amazing arrival address that was mesmerizing us, that's June 20, 1975. So the next morning, Prabhupada always had a morning walk. So all these leaders, they were all on the morning walk, and Radha Bolivar and I were there. And the walk was going on. About halfway through the walk, Prabhupada turned to Radha Bolivar, who was our press manager, and myself, and said, so what is the plan for printing these books? And Radha Bolivar and I have been feverishly planning to go from one book every 4 months. That was the pace when it was in Brooklyn. One book every 4 months to one book every 2 months. We were going to double it. Then we had this idea to create a second assembly line. And if we did that, it would be, instead of one book every 2 months, 2 books every 2 months, which equals to 1 book a month. So on the morning walk, we told Prabhupada we can increase 4 times, from 1 book every 4 months to 1 book a month. We were so foolishly proud of this plan. So Prabhupada paused and thought, and you could see how he was calculating. So 1 book a month, 17 months. So that would take more than 1 year. Meanwhile, he's writing all these other books. So he rejected the whole plan. He's not going to wait a year, more than a year, for 17 books. It's like a year and a half. So when we described how it was going to be a book every 2 months and then 2 books every 2 months, the number 2 was there. So Prabhupada said, I want all 17 books in 2 months. All 17 in 2 months. Now, from what I understood of how the whole process worked, there was no possibility that we could perform all the steps that are involved in producing a book, painting for a book, arranging for the printing of a book, and I just, as was my tendency, blurted out to Prabhupada, that's impossible. I couldn't believe he was actually asking that. It was simply impossible. And I thought I would have a conversation with Prabhupada explaining why. But that's not what happened. Prabhupada planted his cane in the sand of Venice Beach, stopped walking and looked at me so gravely and so intensely, not with anger, but with just pure Krishna bhakti and Krishna's inconceivable potencies, and just looking right at every part of what I am, and said these famous words, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. And then there was this long pause while he continued to look at me and stare into go into my heart and soul, just impress that upon me. And it was a very long, for me, I can't even calculate how long that pause was, but it must have only been a few moments or seconds. I looked up, I saw like a semicircle of all these great sannyasis and leaders of our movement standing right behind Prabhupada, staring at me like, now what are you going to do? It's just young brahmachari. I was a brahmachari, 23 years old. I'd never done anything like this before. I was a person that helps book distribution. That had been my role. Anyway, then Prabhupada started walking on. And Radhabala and I couldn't move. We were frozen. We're just looking at each other like we just couldn't believe what had just happened. And in that instant, for me, I can't explain what Radhabala was going through, but in that instant for me, I remembered instantly, vividly, deeply, how Prabhupada is not a mortal human. Prabhupada is a Shaktavesha avatar. He is a personality that speaks for God himself. From the spiritual world, he has come down into this plane to spread the Sankirtan Hare Krishna movement all over the world, maybe all over the universe. And so in that moment, when I just remembered who Prabhupada was and how he said, nothing is impossible, I started thinking of I just had instant flashes like the planets all over the universe. They're floating without crashing. Look at these inconceivable potencies of God. So here's the person who knows God, an associate directly of God, telling me God has inconceivable potencies. And if you think it's impossible, then you're a fool, idiot. I just in that instant, I realized without having any idea how this can be done. Yes, God has inconceivable potencies, and they can enter this world into us through Prabhupada. And that was my realization on that morning walk. And So we caught up to Prabhupada. I told Radhabala that we can do this. We hadn't figured out how yet, but we just both agreed. There's inconceivable potencies at work here, and we were already feeling such ecstasy thinking about it. And so we caught up to Srila Prabhupada, and we said, Prabhupada, we think we can do it. And I said, can we ask you at least three things? Can we beg of you 3 things? And he said, all right, you can ask. I said, the first thing is, we had been doing Sanskrit books, Srimad Bhagavatam, and we had a Sanskrit department with some Sanskrit scholars, Prajuna and the other devotees in that department. They did not know Bengali. One of the reasons this Chaitanya Caritamritas were coming out so slowly is you had to know Bengali. You had to do Bengali editing of the texts and so on. And so I said, Prabhupada, our men need to learn Bengali. Could you stay in LA long enough so that they could ask you their questions and you could teach them? And Prabhupada said, yes, I will stay as long as needed. He stayed for 3 weeks from that morning walk until he left. And every morning, the whole Sanskrit department was in his quarters, in his room, becoming a Bengali department. And Prabhupada was teaching them Bengali. And they had it down in 3 weeks. So that was the first question we asked Prabhupada. The second we asked him was, we don't have enough devotees right now to do this. We can do it, but could we reach out to other temples and ask them to lend us any devotees that have any skills at all just for this 2-month marathon? And he said, yes. We immediately sent out letters to everybody, making phone calls. The word was traveling, and so many amazing devotees with amazing skills started coming to LA from all over the world to be part of this. They just were being sent. I mean, famous, amazing devotees that were doing composing, typesetting. Other artists were coming. Hayagriva had already come to LA to be the second production line editor. And Prabhupada had liked that idea. Hayagriva was very fast at editing, so we gave him the 9 volumes of Madhya-lila. We gave Jayadvaita the 5 volumes of the Ancha-lila. So in this way, we had divided it up. And the third question that we asked the Prabhupada is, can we have access to you? And when you're not here by phone, which Prabhupada never liked, to ask you questions that the artists have. In the past, the artists would read the Bhagavatam transcripts. They would decide what scenes lended themselves best to be painted. And they would have so many questions. What does this personality look like? What clothing does he wear? Does he have a beard? So many things. You know, the Bhagavatam describes life on other worlds. The artists always had millions of questions. So they would write the questions out in a letter. So often Prabhupada was in another country, so it would take maybe 10 days for the letter to arrive. The secretary would write down the answers and mail back the answers. By the time the letter came back with the answers, you already gone between 2 and 3 weeks, just waiting for vital information that the artists needed to complete their paintings. So we had to end that. We couldn't have a 3-week delay. The second they had artists, I had to be able to go right into Prabhupada's room or call him on the phone if he wasn't in LA and get the answer instantly. And Prabhupada agreed to be bothered in that way, to be interrupted. So that would help the marathon.
Rameshwar Prabhu, we have the clip just lined up of Prabhupada in the temple room, just the last few points. This is just going back to your reference of Srila Prabhupada coming, inviting leaders from all over the movement to come there just so he could say this to you and Radha Vallabha Prabhu on Venice Beach. And let's look at what he said. Monisha will put it up on the screen, and we'll just listen to Prabhupada's talk at this point.
That is very fond of books. And he told me personally that if you get some money, print books. Therefore I am stressing on this point. Where is book? Where is book? Where is book? So kindly help me. This is my request. Print as many books in as many languages and distribute throughout the whole world. Then Krishna consciousness movement will automatically increase. Now the educated, learned scholars, they are appreciating our movement by reading books, by taking practical result. Dr. Stilson Judah, he has written one book, perhaps you know, Hare Krishna and Counter Culture. A very nice book about our movement, and he is giving importance. He has admitted that, Swamiji, you have done a wonderful thing because you have turned the drug-addicted hippies into devotees of Krishna, and they are prepared for the service of humanity.
So now we have this scene in Los Angeles all set up by Rameshwar Prabhu. And I want to hear briefly from Dhriti, who I'll let her explain what her circumstances were, because it's quite unusual what she walked into. An eyewitness report of what happened to you, Dhriti, walking into this scene at that time. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what you felt, what you saw?
Well, I had been visiting the Brooklyn Temple because I was underage. I was still in high school. So I started visiting the temple when I was 16. And so I was visiting. I wasn't, an official moved in devotee. And because I went to art school, they immediately connected me with Jadharani and the press, in the Brooklyn, in Tiffany Place. So, I'd visit there and watch Jadharani paint, or, just be in that atmosphere. And then at one point she said, well, the press is moving, so you should come join us. We're going to California. We're going to Los Angeles. You should come. So, I was a child and said, okay. So I promised my parents that I would graduate high school, and then, okay, I bought my ticket and flew out to LA. And somehow I got picked up by the Sankirtan van or something, and they dropped me off at Jadharani's studio. And she said, welcome, and are you hungry? And I said, no. And I was so excited. And she said, good. And she handed me a paintbrush. I didn't even put my bags down. That was it. It was the beginning, because it was in the midst of the marathon. So I just started. So I just, I was asked, what did I think? I thought this was the way it was. You dove in, into the ocean of, this is devotional service, and this is, devotee life. Although I did think that because, this was my first experience moving into the temple, I thought, oh, finally I can participate in festivals and Harinam and all that nectar. For those first months, there was none of that. There was it was really just Mangal Artik, japa, painting, and very, very brief prasadam. There was no other existence really.
Brief prasadam means that you told us yesterday that that the head of the art department would stand there with a stopwatch and give you like 10 minutes to take prasadam.
Yeah,
right?
she said, 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. Come on, let's go. And I don't know, it was very exciting, but it was quite intense. It was very, very intense. There was, and then, you know, it was 24 hours. So there were different, you know, times, you know, you'd have this period to this period of time and someone else would take over, and it was just nonstop production. And I don't know, I just figured it out. I watched and okay, this is how it goes.
Amazing. That goes along with what Rameshwar Prabhu was saying, when there's a order coming from the spiritual world. If you just take it up, then you get the intelligence how to do it.
Right. In that vein, just to set that picture, I had just graduated school.
Let's take a look at this. Monisha, put up the slide deck. We want to see a few pictures of what Dhriti looked like at this time. Bhaktin Miriam. She just walked in. There's another one that's before that. There's I think a younger picture there.
Yeah.
There she is walking in off the street. Go ahead and set us up here, Dhriti. What is this?
That's a picture of a child, you know, a teenager. I was probably, you know, that's what you did. Here we're sharing, you know, we had to finish complete paintings. So if whatever needed to be done is what we did. So if there was an area that was, you know, one artist did and wasn't quite complete, someone else would step in, and the other arm is Jadharani's. And my forte, you know, when in these group paintings were often the hands, feet, and jewelry was my specialty, besides whatever painting I was working on. So this is a scene from that.
I want to bring in a historical fact. Bring us back to the Zoom room for a minute, Manisha. So in our discussing yesterday the process of creating the artwork, an amazing process, Rameshwar, you mentioned a miracle that happened where you just happened to run into somebody who was instrumental in the art department. Can you just give that vignette, and then
I will, but I have to just preface it by saying one thing that led up to all of this. After that morning walk, when we came back to the temple, Prabhupada did the rest of the morning program, and then we called an emergency meeting of all the press devotees. And this is right out of like Lord Chaitanya's travels, where he would go to a village in South India and invest his potencies in a soul to feel great love from chanting, and then tell that soul, now whoever you meet, you continue to share this and invest them with the same ecstatic loving potencies. So that's exactly what happened. We came back from that morning walk and had this emergency meeting with the press devotees who didn't know anything about a 2-month marathon. And we started sharing this inconceivable potency that Prabhupada had just injected into us. And we started explaining, we're going to do the 17 books in 2 months. And it was a magical moment, because every devotee in the press felt as if they were right there with Prabhupada on that walk. It just passed right into all of them. And they became so spiritually enthused and dedicated and attached to Prabhupada. And so that's actually the next step in the marathon, that everyone in the press had to agree. And they did. And at that point, we were brainstorming. We knew we were going to have 2 assembly lines, What we didn't know is that they were going to run each 24 hours a day with different shifts. Those who couldn't stay up for the 24 hours, we'd bring in others late at night to start the, but it would nothing would shut down. There were certain devotees that literally did not sleep. Amazing devotees, Ragatmika, Balai, just this Yamaraj. They didn't sleep. And Radhaballabha and I tended not to sleep. So the next thing that happened in the marathon, and this will lead into the art, the next thing that happened is Radhaballabha and I locked ourselves in my little office and we read all 15 remaining volumes of the Caitanya Caritamrita in about a day and a half, because we had asked Prabhupada, we didn't think we could paint 7 paintings for each book. So we had this idea that this is historical. This is a time where we could send a photographer to India and actually photograph these historical sites from Lord Chaitanya's Leela. And that would reduce, as color plates, going from 7 paintings to maybe 4 or 5. So Prabhupada agreed. So we read the whole Caitanya Caritamrita. We figured out all the places we wanted Bhargava to photograph. We bought him a ticket and we just sent him to India. And we devised with him this. I had no idea when he sends back the film, what is it? Is it a Bhajan Kutir? Is it a Samadhi? I wouldn't have known. So I said, you just include, when you air freight the film back, notes. And he did that. And we developed a system. We told him, if we can't understand it, we'll label it according to the best we can from your writing, and then we'll send it back to you one last time for your final approval. One time, actually, we had 2 books that had already gone to the press, to the printer. The photographs were labeled wrong. Bhargava caught it because we had shipped it to him. He called us frantically from India. And while the book was still at the printer, we corrected the captions. It was that kind of intensity. So that was the photography part of the Caitanya Caritamrita. So right after we finished reading and setting up that, Radhaballabha and I read it again, the whole Caitanya Caritamrita one more time, to pick what paintings we wanted. And again, it just happened in like a day and a half. We had all the paintings identified. These are the 100 paintings that we want in 2 months. And we turned that over to the artists. And 100 paintings in 2 months is 50 paintings a month. Now, how many days are there in a month? I mean, you think about how fast these paintings had to be completed and come out. It's again, an inconceivable potency. Could this ever happen? I mean, sometimes the artists were accustomed in Brooklyn to taking 3 months to really paint a beautiful, amazing window into the spiritual sky. And now they were given 2 to 3 days. So what happened is, one of our Harinam parties at Venice Beach was chanting when a middle-aged man, to me it was anybody over 25 or 30 was a middle-aged man. Anyway, this gentleman who was walking in the sands of the beach, so he was holding his shoes, he was barefoot, came up to the Harinam party and was obviously attracted. His name was Hector. They brought him back to the temple with them in the van. As soon as they got back to the temple, one of the devotees ran to get me and said, we've been talking to this person we just met. He says he's an artist. So I came running out of the press and started talking to Hector, who had an amazing skill as an artist. He could paint in background landscapes so quickly that, and like an entire background painting landscape with hills and trees and leaves on trees and flowers and shrubs, all of that he could do in maybe 1 or 2 days per painting. When we realized he had this amazing skill, it dawned on us, where did this person come from? It's like we're at the beach. It's like somebody came up from the ocean. Krishna had just manifested him. It was a miracle. He was just there, sent by Krishna, because Krishna would do anything to fulfill Prabhupada's desire. That is the intense, amazing love between Prabhupada and Krishna. That reciprocation. This is just one of many examples. So he just showed up magically. And we created an assembly line for all the artists, and practically all the backgrounds and landscapes and all the paintings, Hector did them. And that was part of the art department's marathon, and how Prabhupada was empowering them. Anybody who could hold a brush would join the art department in those days. We went from 4 to 13 artists.
There's a description in the Srimad Bhagavatam of Devahuti, who had performed austerities serving her husband for so long. And then in the deck we have here, there's a sketch that Dhriti had made just walking past a doorway and noticing the lead painter, Jadharani. Could we see that for a second? And maybe Dhriti could talk about, that's not it, there's another sketch.
That's it.
Could you talk about this, the mood of this, and when you painted it?
Right, that was not an uncommon scene. Exhaustion. I'll call this exhaustion. Just that was what was. You wouldn't move. She wouldn't move from the studio. So she's chanting her japa and taking, just exhaustion from painting probably all night, and I was telling you that, we didn't have cameras and iPhones and stuff, it was just a moment that I had to capture, because it kind of represented the whole, what it looked like, just really complete surrender.
It's sort of, this is iconic of the mood there, and the ways the devotees were working in all the different departments, right, Dhriti?
Yeah, right. I mean, if you look, she's sitting on a studio chair, in front of her easel, her hand in her bead bag, just completely exhausted. Her head, everything is is surrendered to the moment. There's nothing left, and then she'll wake up. It was just a moment. It was just probably a 5-minute nap, and then she'd start again. That's how, that was the standard. At least that was what I was thrown into. So, like I said, I thought that was how he was done, and one thing that I want to add, that there was the marathon, but that pace didn't really end. It was sort of like Prabhupada could see, wow, look what they can do, how it could be done. And it sort of continued like that for the next many, many years until his books were completed. That similar pace of just constant, no dawdling, not too much ego and pondering, and the artist's way, to really take their time and reflect. It was just, you prayed and you hoped that Krishna would provide that ability and skill and intelligence immediately. Which was great, because it just, you were on, you were kind of tuned into another dimension almost. I don't mean to sound, exalt this, but it's sort of like you connect to something else, to another energy, and almost it seemed like Krishna could work through you a little bit if you didn't get in the way.
Uh-huh. What a beautiful description, Dhriti. And that painting was a perfect.
I have to tell you one thing that I left out, very important. really important. LA community was feeling this inconceivable ecstatic energy of this marathon. They weren't directly working on the production, but their service was invaluable to making this marathon a reality. They were bringing prasadam to the press devotees in their gallery rooms and offices and dark rooms. They were doing laundry for the press devotees. They were buying toothpaste for the press, whatever they needed. The entire LA community of devotees was doing the support work, without which there would have been too many interruptions and distractions. And they made it possible for this marathon to be completely like samadhi, no distraction. I have to give them all the credit. We organized the LA Temple to be the support for the marathon devotees, and they themselves became marathon devotees in that way. And I have to tell you one other thing. This marathon, it had so many effects on us, but one of them, before we talk about the ultimate effect of the Caitanya Caritamrita, one of them was just the relationship we were feeling with Srila Prabhupada. No one in the mature world knows what love is. They just have perverted reflections of what love is. But when you have unconditional desire to please the person that you love, an unconditional surrender with no thought of oneself, that level of love is what we read about sometimes in the Krishna book. I mean, that's what Prabhupada brought to this movement. He brought the love of the spiritual world, and we could feel that for him. And that was not a perverted reflection. That was a genuine realization of total, inconceivable surrender and desire to please Prabhupada. He awakened that in us. We became so fanatical lovers of Prabhupada. That's one of the effects that this marathon had, not just on us, but on the whole movement.
Rameshwar, I want to ask you about why the Caitanya Caritamrita. Why is this so special? Can you shed a little light from what Prabhupada said or wrote, and the idea that was inherent in this desire to get them all out so quickly? Why the Caitanya Caritamrita? Why is it so important to us?
Well, okay. Later, I'm going to go back to the other parts of the miracles. But on this specific question that you asked, Prabhupada is always described as the Vaishnav literatures that he is giving the world in different stages. There's the beginning of education and spiritual life, which is Bhagavad Gita. Then there's college level spiritual life, which is the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then there's post-college, as if you're getting a PhD in spiritual knowledge and life, and that's Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. Prabhupada has always described these works in that, using that as an example. Why do we chant the Panchatattva Maha Mantra before chanting the Hare Krishna mantra? Because we can't approach Krishna. We're too impure. But through Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and the Panchatattva, we can approach Krishna. So we always pray to them first. Lord Chaitanya appeared in the world to enable us to become devotees without first having to be totally pure and surrendered, as Krishna asked in the Bhagavad Gita. Lord Chaitanya said, I'm not going to wait for you to be totally pure and totally surrendered. I'm going to give you this ecstatic experience and this full knowledge and realization, even if you're not pure, not surrendered. And thus you'll have this taste and you won't be able to give it up. That's what Lord Chaitanya is. That's what Caitanya Caritamrita, that's his leelas. That's him doing this for the world. And without that, we cannot approach Krishna. As much as we want to just think we can just go right to Goloka, it doesn't work like that. We have to go through Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda. We have to go through the Panchatattva and their representatives in order to approach Krishna in this age. And that's what the Caitanya Caritamrita does. Right now, the world, even if they've heard of Krishna, they haven't really heard yet about Lord Chaitanya the way we need them to. That Lord Chaitanya is Krishna, who's come to give you the way to go to Krishna. It's just so divine that Krishna would do this. And we have to popularize Lord Chaitanya, make the world know of him. So when we were first starting this marathon, I asked Srila Prabhupada, thinking, this is so esoteric. I mean, are we printing these books just for the devotees in our movement? Which means I would print maybe at most 5,000 copies per volume. And Prabhupada said, no, I'm thinking like that. I was so fortunate that Prabhupada always corrected me and chastised me. I was blessed with him always smashing me, correcting me. So he said, no, this is for everyone. And I said, Prabhupada, in the middle of a Madhya-lila or an Anjali-lila volume, it's just give it out and sell it on the streets. And he said, oh, yes. The transcendental mercy of the whole Panchatattva is in every word. It's in every volume. And so this is for the masses. They don't have to understand it. You give this to them. And so by that explanation, we had to negotiate with printer, paper mills. We had to negotiate 20,000 hardbound volumes of each of the 17 books. Now, for those who have never worked with printers, especially in the pre-digital age, they had presses, they had book schedules with publishers and authors. And here we are needing a printer to drop everything and free up their presses just for us, the Hare Krishna movement. Now, it's kind of inconceivable when you think of the great publishers of the world and authors of the world that they would push them aside and delay them for 2 months while they took us on. The biggest hardbound printer in America at that time, we couldn't work with Dynapon anymore. The delays with shipping, it was just impossible. So we had found a printer in Tennessee called Kingsport Press. They were the largest printer of hardbound books in North America. We met with the president of that company. He knew that we had just printed 350,000 hardbound Bhagavad Gita's abridged with Dynapon. So he's looking at these incredible volumes of books that potentially could be given to his company. And so we're meeting with him, and he made the decision to free up all the presses at Kingsport Press, push back every publishing company and every author, and take on the Hare Krishna movement, Sri Caitanya Caritamrita Marathon. He just saw, this is great. There's going to be a future of our printing company. We want to work with this Hare Krishna movement. So that was one miracle that happened, because that's not normal. That their main business in these publishing companies, now all of a sudden they're taking us as their main business. And the same thing with paper mills. We had to get them to push us ahead of every other order. Truckloads, trainloads of paper had to be shipped to Kingsport Press for this. And we were negotiating, and we found a paper mill that would agree to do this. So those behind the scene activities was part of what we were organizing as we were going through this marathon. But it was all about bringing Lord Chaitanya to the world, not just for the devotees to be able to approach Krishna, without which we can't. We cannot approach Krishna directly in the pure way, but for the whole world to be able to approach Radha and Krishna, they have to go through Lord Chaitanya. That's what it means for us to read and distribute the Caitanya Caritamrita to the world.
Radha Mohan Prabhu has put up 20,000 times 17 equals 340,000 books. 340,000 books. And to reiterate what you just said about Prabhupada's desire for the distribution of the Caitanya Caritamrita, he said that people have to have this mercy and just get it out there. He wasn't considering that it was postgraduate or esoteric nature, but he wanted that it to be available in human society for the benefit of everyone. Is that correct?
It is more than correct.
Okay.
And what the printer had to do, it's not like 340,000 of just one title. That would be easier than 20,000 of 17 titles, because each time you have a different title, the whole setup for the printer, the plates, everything is different. You have to take it away from that press, that printer, and bring in the next setup. So this was a very complicated, coordinated effort between the BBT and the printer to be able to move 17 different titles practically all at once. And,
let's bring up a few slides for a minute. Monisha, sorry, Rameshwar Prabhu, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
No, whatever you want.
Okay, let's look at some slides. You can continue this thread, and this will give you a little visual of what was going on in the ground. You'll see some pictures of Prabhupada looking over the operations in New Dwarka. You can go to the top, and let's go down from there so we don't miss anything. Is that the top of the deck?
No.
Keep going higher.
That's where it starts. Okay. That's our production board. Every title of the 17 books is in the column, and the up and down columns for each book is each different stage of production, so that Radha Ballabha and I could figure out day or night what stage every book production was at. So we created this nice production board. And it was just, how did we do this? Where did these ideas come from?
Give us the next slide, Monisha.
Yeah, that's Prabhupada looking at some of the transparencies for the paintings. Prabhupada walking through every room of the new ISKCON Press BBT building. These are now photographs of the actual pages of the book that had to be photographed in order to become plates, in order to be printed by the printer. These are sketches, and just every aspect of the production line we were showing Prabhupada as he walked through the press. And different devotees were explaining to Prabhupada what they did.
There's a nice picture of Rameshwar Prabhu interacting with Prabhupada. You can see the eagerness in his face. From these photographs, the excitement is palpable. The spiritual energy flowing through the room. Keep going, Manisha.
Let me just tell you the next part. That's we're showing Prabhupada. We're walking on the veranda of the press building in that photograph, and you can see all the devotees down on the ground, just wanting a glimpse of Prabhupada. Prabhupada was the sinecure of our eyes. He was the sun and the moon. He was the true representative, almost like a personification of Gordon and Nitai, especially Lord Nityananda. The mercy of Lord Nityananda is visible through the spiritual master, the pure devotee. So we couldn't take our eyes off of Prabhupada. And what was so wonderful about this marathon is as we got caught up in doing this,
Zoom room.
we truly stopped caring about bodily necessities. We had this amazing and very rare opportunity to enter into the world of Prabhupada, of the six Goswamis, of what it's like, of Krishnadas Kaviraj, what it's like to not care about eating or sleeping, to only care about other distractions to our service. We got glimpses of that, and we got to live it, literally. And if you'll allow me, I have notes and diaries from this era. Anyway, one day I'll try to publish this, but I just want to read to you, because this will lead right into what Driti was saying. My one little description of the art department during the marathon, if I may.
Sure. 1 second. I just want to ask Driti one question. You had described, this goes along with this goes in the thread you were just, you put before us, Rameshwar Prabhu, and Driti, you told us about how, what possessions did you bring with you? What did you keep?
Actually, I all we had, or that's what I wrote to today, was I didn't even have a sleeping bag. I was provided a sleeping bag. So you owned a sleeping bag, a bead bag, and a change of clothes was pretty much, and paintbrushes was pretty much your possessions. So you didn't have anything to worry about or concern yourself with. It was just, you did go to Mangal Artik, you chant, go to paint. That was life. And it was very, you were absorbed. You were completely absorbed. There was no other distraction. And it was a wonderful, for me personally, because this was my beginning. It was a perfect immersion. I just got into it, and that was great. And that was how I got trained. There was no other way. This was the way. Which
let's see your
really,
sketch of Srila Prabhupada from the balcony. You
Oh,
pull
yeah.
that up, and Rameshwar just mentioned how Prabhupada is the cynosure of everyone's life, and just set this up, and about this sketch and what your life
Well,
was looking at Prabhupada.
When I came a few days later, Prabhupada also came. So he's giving the Bhagavatam class. And it was an amazing moment, because from the balcony, I could see him. And that's how I was trained in art school, to paint and draw and everything from life. So this was an amazing opportunity to, have him present before me. And there's something about a direct relationship, when you're drawing or painting, you get into a different mindset. So it's such a intense focus. So to have him, he's speaking his word, I hear his words, but to be, focused on his presence was, I feel just so thrilled that I was able to capture that.
And on a lighter note, you had mentioned nowadays we have smartphones. You can snap a picture anywhere.
Right.
That was the smartphone back then. You drawing.
That was the smartphone. That's right. We really had not much, and that was fine. That was, devotional life, a monastic life, ashram life. And it was fine. You didn't mind, because there was something going on. There was some taste, some sweetness, some happiness that was derived. And
thank you so much.
I have to mention something about Driti's unique position. Not only did she come having never been living in a temple before and just get thrown into this amazing ocean of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, there were differences between the senior artists that had been painting for Prabhupada's books before and the artists that had joined just for the marathon and then stayed on to continue. Over the years after the Krishna Book Art Marathon, the artists, we had stopped doing assembly line painting. Each artist was responsible for their own work. And naturally, they had a vision and they had desires, spiritual desires, to make it as perfect as they could be with their vision. So it was very hard for the more experienced senior artists to go back to being on an assembly line. That was really very hard for them. And that's what I just was going to read to you from my diary, just one little section.
Yes. Would you like to see that on the screen? Is
See
that
what?
part of the slide? Are those in the
No.
slide? Okay.
No, I've never read this to anyone before.
All right.
I have hundreds of pages of notes and diary notes that I've never read this out loud to anyone before. So you're
from the chat box here, Krishna Priya had written, "Why we waited so long to distribute CC? It is not even printed in Dutch." And so, it's an eternal process, but this is why we're having this Be a Gardener campaign, is to bring attention to the Caitanya Caritamrita, its glory, its importance. It's vitally important to Srila Prabhupada, and therefore anyone who takes up this process of reading the Caitanya Caritamrita and distributing it is connected. What to speak of the languages that are still there in the world where it hasn't been translated. This is a service. So this is a warm-up year. We're just warming up. Put your safety belts on, because next year it's going to be big. We're going to go for it. They didn't even have enough Caitanya Caritamritas to accommodate us. So some of the trustees warned me. They said, don't get this too big because we can't bring all the books. But I said, you better get ready for next year. So this is what we're doing right now. We're gardeners. This is the Be a Gardener campaign. We're planting seeds, Krishna Lila, about this, and get ready to go, because it's an eternal order. We can take it up at any time. And that's why we brought in these two today to remind us of why this is important. Rameshwar Prabhu, please go ahead with your diary. This is vital information for the world.
Well, this is just one of, I have a section on each department, but this is for the art department. The artists especially were actually going crazy. Late at night, like about 2 o'clock in the morning, when one artist would fall asleep, I would take their canvas secretly out of their room and bring it to whichever artist was still awake. Just so that at no time was there ever a moment when the painting was not being worked on. We had 4 artists when the art department was in New York. Now we had 13. We built up the art department. We had tripled it, actually. We had Gauri. These are the names of artists that you may not know. Everyone's heard of Dhriti. Everyone's heard of Jadharani, Muralidhar, and Parikit, and Pushkar. We had Jairam, Ramnath, a girl named Trudy had just joined. It's in my notes. Ramdas had joined just a little later, and so on. Saradia. So getting back, and Bardraj, we got him to do some painting. So the artists were literally livid when I took their painting, gave it to someone else, and then brought it back to their easel. So when they woke up, whatever they were working on, the face of a great personality, it was somehow a different mood or a different expression. They were livid. Charohas, Pandu, the artists were all threatening to kill me. They couldn't take that I was doing this. And I'm just going to tell one quick story. One morning, Parikit had woken up and a beautiful face that he had been working on had been painted over by Jadharani because I had moved his painting at around 2 a.m. to her easel for another 2 hours of work. And then I snuck it back onto his easel so that when he would wake up, it would be there. I don't know what I was thinking, like, he's not going to notice the difference. Well, he noticed. He was so angry. They were all so angry. But this one morning, he couldn't contain himself. So he's like a red, like a bull, like a transcendental bull, ready to gore me or strangle me. He's running all over the press looking for me. And he finds me in my office. At this point, it was like the 5th, 6th week into the marathon, and somehow Prabhupada had blessed us. We literally were not sleeping unless we fell asleep where we were. We were not. We didn't even need it. We're on Prabhupada time, I call it. For those few devotees that ever traveled with Prabhupada, we called it Prabhupada time. It wasn't time in the material world of the material body. We're on his schedule. So anyway, Parikit found me, and he's standing at the door, and now the object of his anger is right there. The desire to kill me is manifest, that he starts charging me. And I'm just watching this. And midway in his charge, the super soul in his heart enlightens him and gives him this great knowledge and feeling of what we're all doing together for Prabhupada and for Lord Chaitanya and for the conditioned souls. He had all these realizations in a matter of like 1 or 2 seconds. So as he's running full speed over a distance of 10 feet, his charge for my neck ends up being a full prostrated Dandavats holding onto my feet, crying and begging forgiveness. These are like some of the internal pastimes that were going on in the press. So he stood up, I stood up, we were both crying like babies. We hugged each other. We didn't have to say a word. We both understood what we were doing and what we were feeling. And then he just walked back to his easel to continue his service. So very intense emotions were going on during this marathon.
Now, you have some documents that are very important to look at. Before we look at them as a closing of this, because we're running down on the hour and a half, I want to show the current campaign that's going on right now, just for 2 minutes, so everyone can understand what this is, why we're doing it. I'm so appreciative of Krishna Priya for bringing this up, the importance of it. We conceived of this marathon that would start at the beginning of February and go all the way to Gaur Purnima, and we'll continue this each year, emphasizing the Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. There's a lot we can do within that period of time. It's called Be a Gardener, sow the seeds of bhakti. And the goals of this campaign were rather simple. We kept them kind of benign because we had such big marathons during last year. The read and share at least one verse from Caitanya Caritamrita means keeping the bar low. Just at least one verse, so you touch the book. Listen to at least one of Srila Prabhupada's lectures on Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. And we had recommended this one that is, as you can see here, from the Adi Leela 1.4, and a couple more. Take an inventory of your Caitanya Caritamrita sets. How many do you have? Because if you don't have them, how are you going to read them or distribute them? And make at least one set of Sri Caitanya Caritamrita visible. Means take it out of the box, put it somewhere where devotees can see it, put it online. I saw that some devotees were putting them on their Facebook pages, and they were selling sets of Caitanya Caritamritas. So this is, again, a warm-up, this campaign, the Be a Gardener. And lastly, inaugurate at least 10 additional monthly Sankirtan festivals globally so that we can increase the congregational book distribution. So
I have to tell you one more. I have to tell you one more Leela here. Just
yes. You're up now. I just wanted to get this out of the way. We're coming back to the Zoom room.
Okay.
And
so about the 5th week into the marathon, Radha Bolivar and I jump in a car and they go to the LA airport to pick up this box that had been shipped to us from Kingsport Press. It was like 2 a.m. We get it through the airport. We rush back to the temple room. Now, by the time we got to the temple room, it was around 3:30 or 4 o'clock. In those boxes that we had picked up were the first 3 volumes of the Madhya Lila and the first 2 volumes of the Antya Lila. 5 new books. We're trembling. We can't contain our ecstasy. The pujaris allowed us, we hadn't bathed or anything. It was very unusual. The pujaris allowed us to go onto the altars and put one of each of these 5 books on each altar at the feet of Sri Sri Gauranitai, Sri Sri Rukmini and Dwarkadish, and Sri Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra, in time, so that when the doors opened for 4:30, Mangalarti, and there's like about 300-400 devotees in the temple community at this time in LA, the doors opened. No one knew this was coming. And there are 5 new books on the altar. The devotees are stunned in that room, that Mangalarti. They're crying. They're screaming. They're laughing. They're chanting with all their heart and soul at the top of their lungs. No one could, they realized they're watching a miracle take place. It was the most ecstatic Mangalarti of my lifetime. It was so intense. Nobody's feet were touching the ground. That's how it felt. And it just went on and on as the devotees, it was just hitting them. Prabhupada bringing these inconceivable potencies of the spiritual world of the Lord into our plane of existence. And here's the proof. Nothing for a devotee, nothing is impossible. That was the message that went throughout the whole movement, throughout the whole world. Devotees realized never again will we ever say anything is impossible. That's what that was like, that Mangalarti.
So Lakshmi Van wrote in, he said, I have heard about this for the last 45 years, but never like this. I can't move from my seat. Rameshwar Prabhu, if you would, since we have about 8 minutes left, which is a travesty, perhaps you could read from the texts that we have set up on the screen, if that's what you'd like to do.
Please, yes. This is at the end of the marathon. This letter, Prabhupada had gone back to India, so the final volumes of the Caitanya Caritamrita were delivered to him in Vrindavan. And it was in August that he received these. So with our accompanying letter, and Prabhupada wrote, Dear Ramaswamy and company, just to be clear, this was for all of us, this is not just me. I'm in receipt of your letter of August 31 and the new 6 volumes, the last 6 volumes of the Caitanya Caritamrita. So the books have increased. They're all very nicely done. I think I may stop all touring and just sit down here for translating. I just have to pause and tell you what was in my letter of August 31. I was writing on behalf of all the devotees, telling Prabhupada, I'm begging you, Prabhupada, begging you. We can't live without doing this for you, being this connected to you, being this in love with you and surrendered to you. Please give us the rest of the Bhagavatam and any other books you want to. We can't imagine living unless we're doing this service for you of publishing and distributing your books. Please engage us in this way. That was our fervent prayer to Prabhupada at the end of this marathon, that don't let it stop. As
Jyoti,
Judy said, do not let this marathon stop. So there's one line of this letter which is very
wait
important.
1 second, Rameshwar Prabhu. Jyoti, you told us something yesterday about the experience of you and some of your God sisters. There was crying and things at the end of the marathon. Can you just repeat that short vignette?
Well, actually, it was later. We'd been, this was my experience. This was how life was. You painted for Prabhupada. You worked for the BBT. You were a team. You were on Prabhupada's team. It wasn't even just a team. It was because the books were so dear to him, and we were part of, like I said, his words were the jewel. We were creating the setting, and it was essential. And he was so pleased with it, and the paint. All of it was all mixed up in our existence, of our identity. And then when Prabhupada passed, and the announcement was made in the morning, it was of course traumatic for the whole movement, to us. But the thing that someone told me later, I was crying, sobbing, was what did that mean? Did that mean my service was over? That the press, the BBT would be finished? And that was the devastating part, because that was the connection. That was our link to Prabhupada through this service. And, we understood that so much in the art department, because we had this back and forth, directly. And to conceive that would end was the end of, felt like the end of our life. So what would happen?
Priceless. Thank you so
yeah.
much, Jyoti. Thank you.
Remember,
Rameshwar,
Prabhupada had said cultural conquest. He said this movement is here to create cultural conquest of the whole planet. There will never stop being a need for authorized bona fide transcendental art as a window to the spiritual world. There will never stop being that need till the whole world is drowning in the images. We have it in every room of our homes and public buildings, and you can see this is Trudy and Ron's painting over this is where I live.
Rameshwar,
I'm surrounded by them.
Let's finish your, see.
Okay, so you have
letter.
taken seriously, the publishing and the distribution of these books. That is the success of our mission. You have taken seriously this work. And I know my Guru Maharaj is pleased with you. He once said, 1,000 times more than me. And these are the feelings of Prabhupada passing on to us, because he wanted this. And so here's the key line. So by this, your endeavor, printing and distributing his books, you will all go back home, back to Godhead. We used to call this letter our ticket to the spiritual world. Prabhupada is saying to everyone, you do this, you will surely go back home, back to Godhead. It's assured. You have a ticket. That's how we took this letter at the end of the marathon. But as I said earlier, we couldn't live without this. We never wanted it to stop. We still don't ever want it to stop. And for all of those listening, I will tell you that the personification of never stopping is right here on your screen in the persona of Sri Vaisheshika Prabhu, never stopping to give this love of God to the fallen souls, ever. He lives for it up until his last breath. That's why we love him so much.
Zoom room, please. Rameshwar Prabhu, as everybody knows, and as you well know, I'm only following your footsteps, taking the remnant of the senior devotees who were so fortunately situated at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, getting direct instruction. You passed it on to us very kindly, as one would pass on Mahaprasadam remnants. Dhriti, the sacrifice you made and the way that you walked in is obviously something extraordinary, and it's an example for all of us, the way that you lived your life and simply gave yourself in complete focus on serving Srila Prabhupada. It's so touching to hear about the way you wept when Prabhupada left, and your question was, how will this service go on? And I think the answer Rameshwar Prabhu gave all of us is so hopeful that it's still here. One of our devotees, Ananda Murari Prabhu, after he finished university recently, I said, so how was it? He said, my realization is that education is what you make of it. It's what you put into it. Prabhupada's instruction is eternal. The Sankirtan movement is eternal. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's order to spread this to every town and village is eternal. And it's still right here, a live wire for anyone to grab. And that's why we have this global team. This is why there's an urgent call, and it's for our benefit to hold on to it together, as Rameshwar Prabhu so aptly repeated. It's Rameshwar and company. We're all in that company together, and we can still grab that by mustering the sense of cooperation to distribute books all over the world. Let's do it. Let's make this Caitanya Caritamrita the most famous spiritual book in the world. No one can stop us if we work together. No one. So I thank Rameshwar Prabhu.
Can I add just one thought about what happens when you distribute the Caitanya Caritamrita?
Please, please.
If you distribute these Caitanya Caritamritas, what will happen to that book distributor? He will be given deep realizations of Lord Chaitanya, deep feelings and emotions for Lord Chaitanya. The more you distribute him to others, the more your consciousness, your spiritual awareness of him, and your ecstatic emotion for loving him will awaken. That's the benefit for the book distributor. The more you distribute, the more the supply and ecstasy increases in you, the more the realizations increase in you. That's really the secret of book distribution.
Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Shri Gaurnitai, Shri Shri Panchatattva, if you so desire, please empower our global team to follow in the footsteps of Rameshwar Prabhu, Dhriti Prabhu, and all the great devotees who set the pace for us and the example for embracing the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada's instruction. If you so desire, please let us increase book distribution in ways that the world has never seen before. Let us fill up train cars again with Caitanya Caritamrita and all of Srila Prabhupada's books, and shower that mercy on the people of the world at this time when they're so confused and disjointed. It's our only hope. Thank you very much for considering our request. Everyone who agrees with this prayer in part or in whole, please unmute and say Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Unmute. Let everybody unmute.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Nitai
Hare
Gaur.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Bol. Hare Bol.
Vancha kalpadrishta kripa
Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavamaki Jai.
Hari Bol, Hari Bol.